The 1910s, a decade that gas was less than 30 cents, the sky was brighter, and a decade that led the United States from violent progressive reforms to a much better nation that we know today.
However, extremely flawed, the African Americans were almost entirely pushed to the side by the progressive movement. It wouldn't be for years to come for them to be treated even close to equal.
In 1914, the United Associated was formed by Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican politician activist to promote the segregation of whites and blacks.
Takes like this were rampant in the white and black communities due to years of racial segregation and the then recent Great Migration to the North.
The Progressive Era was a long and treacherous period in United States history. One of the most popular movements during this time was the suffrage movement, from its humble beginnings in the mid-1800s to a sprawling movement of exuberant teams across the world fighting for equal rights. Several other movements took place during this time, including labor rights, economic reform, environmental protections, and the welfare of the poorest. However, the progress that drove the early 1910s was halted prematurely by the beginning of the First World War.
June 2nd, 1914, the Great War broke out. After the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, main players of Europe and Asia were pulled into the First World War. The Central Powers of Europe, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire faced off against the allies of France, Great Britain, Russia, Italy, and Japan. These factions fought in bloody battles for several years, while the United States looked on supporting in non-combat scenarios. Most Americans were in heavy support of staying out of the conflict. Besides sending weapons and munitions, the country remained nearly as 100% negative factorial on joining the war effort. America's tough and long history of conflicts, along with the United States' first taste at being a world power, led most of the country to neglect the war in the East. However, in year 3 of this bloody war, on January 17, 1917, Germany sent a high-value telegram to the American adversary, Mexico, who at this point had built up quite a large country and rebounded from the American-Mexican War so many years ago.
The message coded the Zimmerman note was a telegraph advising Mexico to declare war on the U.S. in order to move their focus off of Europe. In exchange, the former Mexican land seized by the U.S.
The Germans sent this to get the United States' focus off of Europe and therefore allow Germany's victory to come smoother. This message was sent to the president, and over the next few months, the people of the United States were enthralled with the fight and fury to fight the First Great War. On April 4th, 1917, the United States declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary.
The Southern Drive for War took over 2 million men into the enlisting station with a draft of over 800,000 sent into combat.
What war did you fight and what years did you serve?
Operation Iraqi Freedom 3, 4, and 5. I served from May 2003 till May of 2008.
What impact does war have on young men?
Well, I guess lots of different variables. One, for instance, could be being away from home for the first times, sacrificing a lot of freedom that other people their age might be able to do that they can't, and having to come home and deal with different stressors that they never had to deal with before they went to war.
What drove you to the military?
Well, 2 things. The first thing was 9/11, and then the second thing was that I needed to do something with my life, and I figured college was an option, but I didn't have the money, so Uncle Sam was going to pay for my college, so I got to complete 4 years to do it, and they were going to get paid for it, and that's what I did.
What would a draft of the size seen in World War I impact today's people?
I think you would see a lot of retaliation and a lot of people not wanting to do the draft. And I think that, unfortunately, you would see a big surge in people ditching the country and trying to get out of it.
The United States went on to change the tide of the war to an Allied force victory. Leaving Europe in a state of ruin, however, the state Europe was left in was of no concern to the growing United States, because when the war peace agreements were all finalized in November 1918, the economy was at an all-time high, and being on the winning side of one of the bloodiest wars up to its time left the States on a forever thriving upward spiral. The conflict of World War I shaped the 1910s and allowed for the already thriving nation to burst into the most militarily and economically influential country in the modern world.
'10 was the decade of fashion for many.
The fashion of the 1910s can be broken into two periods of influence.
Pre-World War I and post-conflict. Before the war, Paul Poiret, a French fashion designer, dominated the women's space.
His works featured elegant drapes with hanging fabrics to create an elegant look of vibrant colors and an expansive, wavy silk.
In 1914, the war started and drastically changed the style of men and women to a more conservative style.
This can be seen in the rise of covered looks and bonnets, along with the rise of overalls in women's clothing. Lower class women wore homemade dresses that had stretchable fabric so that working was easier.
This trend was popular for many years to come, exceeding the 1910s, but men's clothing stayed the same for many years to come.
Men wore classic black vests with collared lounge suits. Though the United States hadn't joined the war, the effects of the war were still in the styling and conservation of resources.
Fashion, however, cannot be talked about without the talk of music.
Over years and years in the music industry, you get a feeling of what your inspirations come from. And when you really look back and admire the past of music, you can see that a lot of what I do and what anyone else does is truly just building off of what the past had to offer. And especially looking back at the 1910s is where American jazz was born and what really laid the groundwork for pop music.
Unlike in the modern age, people of the 1910s either had to go to live performances or spend over $600 to play an analog phonograph.
Was the music of the times worth it? Here are snippets of the top 5 songs of the 1910s.
To me, you, sound of kisses floating on the breeze. Act 1, B. I've been worried all day long. Don't know if I'm right or wrong. I can't help just what I think. I am dreaming, dear, of you, day by day. Reason of liberty. Hurry right away, no delay, go today. Make your daddy glad to have had such a... Oh, my honey?
Yeah.
Oh, my honey?
Yeah.
Better hurry and let me and, ain't you going?
Where are you going?
Ain't you going?
Where are you going?
Just with you, man.
Music of this kind was in its infancy. Wouldn't gain mainstream popularity in the 1910s.
However, with an all-time high reached in the economy by the end of the 1910s, a normal income was around $3,000 a year.
That is in stark contrast of the previous decade, which ended with an average annual income of less than $500.
Families were making so much more money, but what were they spending it on?
Families would often spend money on roller skating amusement parks and home instruments to keep themselves occupied. TV and radio weren't an option during this time period, so kids resorted to long bike rides, and adults would rarely spend money on lavish trips. The 1910s was a large halfway point between the 1800s and what we would call America today. Various inventions and amenities such as refrigeration, personal vehicles, and air conditioning either hadn't been invented or hadn't hit mainstream popularity. In all, a lot of this money was either invested in homes or saved in order to better their family's future. People of the 1910s were coming off a long line of impoverished laborers who had to come build everything from the ground up and survive in the face of adversity. However, now that burden was lifted and it was only up from here, people, as the period grew and labor reforms were advanced, people worked much less and henceforth had a lot more family time at home, along with the rise of novels and reading that became mainstream. During this period, reading became more and more popular, and literacy was on the rise as children were forced out of the mines into schools. And as the years went on, the people of America would grow from these reforms, and the saved money that families were able to keep would lead many families to bright futures as wages rose and the nation became wealthier.
However, as people were more educated and physically healthier, sports were more of a viability.
Sports wouldn't have anywhere near the acclaim they do today until the Roaring 20s. However, many were still popular.
Professional baseball, especially the MLB, was extremely popular during this period. Professional games throughout this period will see an average of 6.3 million live people at some point during the year.
Some of the most popular players from the era.
Number 3. Ty Cobb was an outstanding center field that played for the Detroit Tigers during the 1910s. He played for 22 years and was born in Narrows, Georgia on December 18, 1886. He solemnly died on July 17, 1961 in Atlanta, Georgia. Number 2. Tris Speaker was also one of the greatest center fields in the history of the MLB. He played for the Boston Red Sox until 1915, then he joined the Cleveland Guardians until 1926. He played for 21 years. Tris Speaker was born April 4, 1888 in Hubbard, Texas. He passed on December 8, 1958 in Whitney, Texas. Number 1, Babe Ruth. One of the most iconic baseball players of all time, he played for the Red Sox from 1914 until 1920, when he famously joined the New York Yankees. He was born February 6, 1895, in Baltimore, Maryland, however, after an expansive and extremely motivational 22-year career, followed by a retirement of glory. He sadly passed on August 16, 1948, in New York City.
The Olympics was a tradition long celebrated worldwide. During the 1910s, there was only one Olympic event held.
The Summer Olympics of 1912 were held in Stockholm, Sweden, on May 5th to July 22nd of 1912. During this Olympic event, the United States took home 26 gold medals, 18 silver medals, and 19 bronze medals.
They completely swept the event, only leaving Sweden anywhere close with a total of 23 gold, 23 silver, and 17 bronze medals.
The event established the United States as not only a growing power but a fierce nation filled with competitive athletes.
Outside of competitive sports, families had a lot more time to spend together due to labor reforms. So buying home sports equipment was much more common.
Family bonds and the ancestral ties of our past grew in this decade.
The 1910 was a rich decade full of culture and self-exploration.
This is due to the labor reforms of groups like the Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor. The United States then advanced into a people that work, live, and connect comfortably.
The economy grew to an all-time high and people were the happiest they've ever been.
Sports were growing and people were in a much better place physically and emotionally.
However, the lack of appreciation and integration of African Americans into our society made the progressive era seem bleak in the grand scheme of things.
Along with this, the United States damaged their environment more and more each year, producing more carbon emission as their economic might grew.
Despite this decade's horrible faults, the people in America came out of this decade stronger and in a better place in almost every way possible.
The 1910s were remembered as an integral stepping stone in United States history.
Let me take you by the hand. Up to the man, who's the leader of the band. And I would like to hear the Swanee River singing ragtime. Come on and hear, Alexander's ragtime band. Oh, my honey. Oh, my honey, there's a fiddle with notes that screeches like a chicken, like a chicken.